Shusha Park Incident. I've seen terrifying TV moments, but nothing prepared me for a Ferris wheel engulfed in flames with a child trapped at the top. One man scrambling up the burning frame to pull her to safety. A children's show, 200 kids, and a set turning into an inferno in under 60 seconds. None of this was supposed to be possible inside what was advertised as Brazil's safest TV show. This is Shusha Park, one of the most beloved children's shows of the 90s and early 2000s. For millions of kids, Shusha was more than a host. She was their childhood icon. Parents saw this studio as a once-in-a-lifetime treat, everything designed to look magical and safe. But what the cameras didn't show was how fragile this dream actually was. January 11th, 2001. Studio F was packed that night, almost 300 people. Most of them were children. Everywhere you looked, carnival decorations hung from the ceiling. Foam, glitter paper, fabric. Beautiful and incredibly flammable. For days, staff had complained about a strange smell and the spaceship prop overheating. I remember thinking, why didn't they shut this thing down? Everyone assumed it was just the lights and routine camera heat, but they were wrong. The fire started 5 minutes before Shusha was supposed to climb into that spaceship for the finale. Watch her. Right there, she senses something's off, and within seconds, everything changed. 'A short circuit hits the spaceship, and with decorations packed like kindling, the fire took off fast. For a few seconds, even the cameras kept rolling. You can see the moment the fun drains out of the room, replaced by pure panic. Yet, while most people could run, not everyone could. One little girl, Tamieres, 7 years old, was still buckled into the Ferris wheel as the flames approached. Only one usable exit was left, and this is the moment that still stays with me. Leonilson Vieira, Shusha's bodyguard, chose to go back inside. No one knows how he breathed in there or why he didn't just collapse, but he kept going until he reached 7-year-old Tamieres, who was burned, trapped, and screaming. Leonilson saved her life, but it cost him almost 100% of his airways. "26 people were injured on that day. Tamieres spent 107 days in the hospital, and Leonilson slipped into a coma before slowly recovering. And thankfully, no one died. The stunt disaster. You've probably seen many stunts go wrong, but I guarantee you nothing will steal your nerves like the dead air after this man miscalculates a jump over 5,000 pounds of industrial weight. For decades, this was Germany's Saturday ritual, a show people watched as they enjoyed dinner. Nothing about it looked dangerous. Until 23-year-old Samuel Koch came on screen, spring boots strapped to his legs, ready to jump over 5 moving cars on live television. Rehearsals had gone well, and the safety team signed off on it, but off camera, people close to Samuel said he'd been uneasy. The cars used that night were bigger, faster, and one of them would be driven by his father. Samuel Koch clears the first jump easily. The second jump proved to be difficult, but he recovered on the third jump as the crowd cheered. He had only one last jump to win the money, but this next car was bigger than the previous ones. This car comes around, an Audi A8, and Samuel takes off, but he launches a fraction too late. His body clips the windshield, flips forward, and hits the floor with a sound the microphone picks up too clearly.
Wie getan?
Martina!
When the crew rushed to where he landed, he wasn't moving. Samuel was rushed to the hospital and placed in a medically induced coma to reduce the swelling in his brain. No one knew if it was going to work or not. However, for someone who just did the tango with over 5,000 pounds of metal, Samuel still survived, but he would never walk again. The fallout of the accident was massive. The host resigned, ratings collapsed, and the biggest show in Europe carried a scar it could never shake. Tetsushi Yanagita's fall. A man is face down, choking on mud in a crowd full of people, only able to get out one word, okoshite, help. Hours earlier, this was the safest kind of chaos, a low-budget, low-stakes, regional Japanese variety show covering a local mud festival, butt sumo, and a rice field. Yanagita, the man submerged in the mud, wasn't a stuntman or one of the contestants, he was the announcer, and sometimes the guy who jumps into the mess to give the viewers at home comedic moments. The rules of the game were simple. You try to bump your opponent off the platform into the shallow water and slippery mud. A woman goes in first, full splash. The crowd roars, and then they literally drag him in to shake things up. The host who gets humbled by a female contestant. Yanagita and the opponent get to it, but on the first clash, he loses balance. However, instead of a sideways fall, he goes straight down head first into 10 centimeters of muddy water. Witnesses later swear they heard a dull crack as he hit the ground. The stunt worked, drawing big laughs. No one noticed the man in the mud isn't getting up. People keep laughing as someone nudges him, still thinking he's playing it up, but he still doesn't move, only barely able to get out whispers for help, and it's the only thing he can say. Only after a long, sickening pause does someone realize he isn't acting. In those lost moments, he wasn't just playing dead. He was paralyzed, unable to lift his own head out of the mud. With his face submerged in inches of watery sludge, he was slowly suffocating. Yanagita is immediately pulled out of the mud and taken out of the field on a stretcher, then airlifted to the nearest hospital. He sustained a cervical fracture and spinal cord injury. He spent months in hospital and ended up with 4 limb paralysis. Yet somehow, years later, he rolls back into a studio in a wheelchair, working again, speaking again, and continuing on like he was never face deep in the mud. Niagara Falls Rescue. Battalion Chief John Jacoby looked over the icy ledge at Niagara Falls and saw the impossible. A man was standing in the raging river just 2 feet from the 170-foot drop of Horseshoe Falls. This is the story of a man who went to Niagara Falls to die and then had the most brutally inconvenient change of heart in TV history. Niagara Falls is sadly one of the most active suicide hotspots on the planet. Historically, over 5,000 bodies have been pulled from its base. And on March 11, 2003, that graveyard almost got a new resident. The call came in about a man at the tipping point, just as the state park police were wrapping up a retirement party. Sergeant Pat Moriarty, a 19-year veteran, figured it was just some idiot who slipped. He was not ready for what he saw. When he looked over that ledge, he saw the man literally standing in the river, 2 feet from one of the most dangerous spots in Niagara. And I know what you're thinking. How is he not already dead? Well, in a moment of sheer dumb cosmic luck, he'd managed to jam his feet into a tiny fissure in the rock. Reading the reports from the rescuers, this is the part that still gets me. They said the water was 33 degrees, and at that temperature, hypothermia sets in fast. Your body starts shutting down, and this guy had been there for almost an hour. Someone up there must really be watching out for him. And the reason he was there is almost as ridiculous as the fact that he survived. Turns out he was a 48-year-old man who, according to later reports, had just lost thousands of dollars, his life savings, at a nearby casino. He gambled it all, then went double or nothing against Niagara Falls, forgetting the house always wins. A helicopter moved in to drop a ring, but its rotor wash knocked him off his feet. He slid to within a foot of the edge, and I remember watching and thinking, did they just accidentally yeet this man into the afterlife? Still, somehow he managed to snag another rock and grab the ring on the next try. In the end, they managed to haul him to shore with severe hypothermia, but he survived. His identity was kept private, and while this story has a miracle ending, it's the exception. So, to poorly paraphrase the band TLC, don't go jumping in Niagara Falls. Balloon Priest. He was a Catholic priest floating in a hot air balloon 20,000 feet in the air, and in his final moments, his life depended on one simple, stupid, heartbreaking thing he never learned to do. This is Father Adelier, a Catholic priest in Brazil who fought for the homeless and wanted to build a spiritual rest stop for truck drivers, a genuinely good guy.
Ser na televisão em voo levado por balões. Ele foi de Ampere, cidade que nasceu, até a cidade de San Antônio, na Argentina, a cerca de 100 quilômetros.
And to fund the Rest Stop project, he decided to do something completely unhinged. Attempt to break a cluster ballooning endurance record, taking flight on 1,000 balloons from Brazil to Argentina. He wasn't a pilot with any specific flight training, he was just a guy with a dream, a lawn chair, and a truly terrifying amount of helium. To be fair, he'd done a flight test run with 600 balloons, resulting in a quick 4-hour hop to Argentina. It worked perfectly, so in his mind, he was basically an astronaut. He even took a paragliding course, but got expelled for skipping the boring theory bits. A pattern was emerging. For the big attempt, he was prepared. I mean, look at this kit. Thermal suit, parachute, satellite phone, GPS, enough food for 5 days.
O tempo estava fechado, mas o padre insistiu em voar, mas acabou sendo levado pelo vento em direção ao mar e perdeu o contato por celular quando já estava sobre o oceano, no litoral de Santa Catarina.
He looked like a one-man NASA mission. But there was one tiny problem. A detail so small, so stupid, it's almost poetic. He brought a GPS to navigate the journey, but he never actually learned how to use it. On April 20th, 2008, he strapped in front of his congregation and live TV cameras. The weather was terrible, rainy, and overcast. People told him not to go, but he told them God would make the perfect weather. But on that day, it seems God was otherwise occupied. At first, he's cheerful. He calls down, "Thank God I'm in good health. It's very cold up here, but everything is fine." But those clouds swallowed him, and the winds didn't take him inland. Instead, it started pushing him out over the Atlantic Ocean. Hours passed, and it gets darker and darker. He's alone, 20,000 feet up, and he has no idea where he is. And that's when the panic sets in. It was at that point that he decided to learn how to work the GPS. He tried to contact the staff in Brazil to teach him, but the satellite phone kept going out of range and the battery was getting low. That was the last clear contact. He told them he was going to have to land on the sea, and then nothing. A massive search later found nothing but clusters of his colorful balloons floating on the waves. It was over. Months later, a tugboat found something. It was just the lower half of a body, identified by his clothes and DNA. The mysterious Gardener's World. This is Rod and Rachel Saunders. For over 30 years, they traveled the most remote corners of South Africa hunting for rare seeds. In February 2018, they embarked on their usual journey. This time around, they were joined by BBC's Nick Bailey for an interview on his show, Gardener's World.
Coming to the Drakensberg since we were 16.
Wow.
And I've always had a passion for high-altitude grassland flora.
So why gladioli? There's so many different plant species in South Africa you could have picked.
I think they're beauty.
That footage from February 2018 is the last ever taken of them. Just days after filming, they drove here to the Ngoye Forest to set up a quiet campsite. It was a routine trip, but little did they know they weren't the only ones in that forest. Waiting for them were Saifuddin Aslam Del Vecchio and his wife, Bibi Fatima Patel, two people already on a terrorist watch list. And in a series of WhatsApp messages, they revealed their intentions to haunt them the moment they saw them. They called Rod and Rachel prey, and they had to make sure the bodies would, and I quote, never be found. What followed was a brutal kidnapping. The couple was beaten to death, their bank accounts were emptied, and over £37,000 was stolen. But the most chilling detail was yet to come. The killers stuffed their bodies into their own sleeping bags, drove to a bridge over the Tuguela River, a place infamous for its crocodiles, and threw them in. Fishermen actually found their bodies days later, but they were so decomposed, so scavenged, that they were stored in mortuaries as unidentified. It took months of DNA testing to confirm the smiling couples from Gardener's World were the anonymous bodies in the water. The trial of their alleged killers has been plagued by delays, and to this day they have refused to even appear in court. It's a grim end to a story that began with the simple, beautiful pursuit of a flower. The Evil Show. You know, I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes, but this case, it's less of a hole and more of a bottomless pit. And it all starts with a game show. It's 2012. Peruvian television launches a show called El Valor de la Verdad, the value of truth. The premise is simple and brutal. Contestants are polygraphed off-air, asked over 100 deeply personal questions, and then on national TV they have to answer 21 of them in front of their loved ones.
María Sánchez, operadora de call center, 19 años. Vive con sus padres en Huachipa, Lima. Le formularon más de 50 preguntas con el polígrafo. 21 preguntas.
For every truth they tell, they win more money. A single lie, and they lose everything. The host, Beto Ortiz, had this mantra he'd repeat. La verdad nunca hace daño, aunque duela. The truth never does harm, even if it hurts. However, for the show's very first episode, they found a contestant whose truths weren't just going to hurt, they were going to detonate. Her name was Ruth Taia Saya Sanchez. She was 19, a call center worker from a poor neighborhood in Huachipa, living with her parents. She dreamed of being famous, and she saw this show as her shot. The producers knew. After visiting her home, they knew the confessions she had locked away would be nuclear. In fact, they were counting on it. So, she sits in that red chair. Her parents, Leoncio and Vilma, are right there. So is her boyfriend, Brian Romero, a moto taxi driver.
Mi nombre es Vilma Rosario Sánchez Rojas, mamá de Ruth.
Muy bien, un aplauso para ella. ¿El caballero?
Papá de Ruth, Leoncio Saya Santesana.
Leoncio, bienvenido.
And the questions start. It begins almost playfully. Did you skip school? Do you think being pretty gets you further? Would you return a lost wallet? But then it takes a twist. Ortiz hits her with a question about being embarrassed by her family's manners. Ruth has no choice but to answer honestly. The next question was about her boyfriend. Was she just staying with him until someone better came along? Again, Ruth was honest. Brian, on the other hand, was in shock.
Pregunta 12. ¿Estás con tu enamorado hasta que llegue alguien mejor?
Sí.
But this next question would destroy their peaceful family. Do you really work in a call center? On national television, Ruth revealed to her parents and a packed studio audience that she was a stripper. And you can see it in the actual footage. Her parents are crumbling. Brian is just pale. The host keeps prodding, feigning concern, but the machine just keeps rolling. And Ruth, she's winning money. She's so close to 15,000 soles. That's about $5,000, which is life-changing money for her. The host gives her a chance to walk away, but she's come this far to tell her biggest secret. She says she'll continue. Question 18. Have you ever accepted money in exchange for having sex?
¿Has aceptado dinero a cambio de tener relaciones sexuales?
Sí.
La respuesta es... verdad.
Bien, Talía.
She tries to explain. It was only twice during a desperate time. She gets on her knees and begs her mother for forgiveness as the credits roll. The show gets its explosive premiere. It trends nationally. Ruth Dalia becomes instantly, infamously famous. Tabloids label her the prostitute from the value of truth. And then she disappears. 2 months after the broadcast, she's reported missing. Her family begs for help, and the investigation leads right back to Brian Romero. Because the last time she was seen, she had been leaving home to meet Brian. After days of interrogation, Brian led the police to a hillside in Jicamarca where they found Ruth's body buried in a shallow grave under rocks and cement. She had been missing about 10 to 12 days at that point. In 2014, Brian Romero, her boyfriend, and his uncle were sentenced to life in prison. Brian reportedly told police he killed her because he felt humiliated by her confessions on the show. However, the investigation later revealed he and his uncle, Reddy Leiva, lured her out to obtain her bank PIN and steal her prize money, then killed her and took her phone and documents. And here's the part that's truly chilling. The show never stopped. El Valor de la Verdad continued for years. It was a ratings hit and even came back in 2025. Septic tank murder. This is the moment Lai Huili came home on July 4th, 2020. According to every camera in her building in Hangzhou, she never left. It was a perfectly planned, impossible disappearance that captivated a nation. For 18 days, her husband, Xu Guoli, was the public picture of worry. He gave tearful interviews, pleaded for her return on TV, and even offered a reward. He begged for the return of a wife he claimed he loved very much. But while the country searched for a missing person, the police were running into a wall. They conducted 4 exhaustive sweeps of the complex, checking all 379 apartments, rooftops, water tanks, and even residents' fridges and safes, and they found nothing. No one could explain how a woman could vanish from a sealed building. With every other possibility exhausted, investigators turned to the one place no one wanted to look, the community septic tank. They pumped it for 25 hours, hauling away 38 truckloads of sewage. Officers in protective suits sifted through the waste until they found it. Human tissue. DNA confirmed it was Lai Huili. The discovery flipped the entire case. The missing person was now a homicide victim, and the crime scene was the plumbing connected to her own apartment. And to make it worse, they found critical inconsistencies in Shu's story. More damningly, property records showed his unit had used 2 tons of water the night his wife vanished, an impossible amount for normal use. Confronted with the evidence, Shu Guoli broke down and confessed. He revealed he had purchased tools, a utility knife, and an electric cutter weeks in advance. On that final night, he had slipped sleeping pills into his wife's milk. After she fell asleep, he suffocated her, then dragged her body to the bathroom. The worried husband on TV had spent that night dismembering his wife's body and flushing her remains down the toilet. Every tearful appeal had been a performance. The mystery wasn't how she left the building, but how a killer thought he could hide a monstrous crime in the pipes beneath his feet. The Cemetery Interview. It was 1993. On Spanish-language TV, there was a show called Ocurrió Así, meaning it happened like this. It's your classic tabloid news, old dramatic music, and sensational stories. And for one episode, they found a grieving father named Emilio Núñez. His 15-year-old daughter, Joandra, had died by suicide while pregnant just 2 months earlier. And Núñez was consumed with blaming his ex-wife, Maritza Martin. He told the producers she had hurt their daughter and drove her to kill herself. The police had already looked into his theories and found no evidence, but that didn't matter to Núñez, and it didn't matter to the TV show because his pain made for good television. So they arranged to interview him at his daughter's graveside. The reporter, Ingrid Cruz, and her cameraman, Jorge Delgado, are there. The camera was rolling, Núñez was talking, laying flowers on the grave, and then another car pulled in. It was Maritza. She came along to visit her daughter's grave, and the reporter saw an opportunity.
Si es tan amable, por favor, ¿podría bajar el cristal, Joandra? Doña Maritza, para que me hable de su hija Joandra.
She rushed over and started banging on Maritza's window, demanding she answer questions. Maritza just sat there, silent. The entire time, Núñez was watching. He walks away from the grave, off camera, toward his Jeep. At the same time, Maritza gets out of her car, trying to ignore the reporter, and starts walking toward the grave. But Núñez suddenly rushes back. He shoves the nagging reporter aside, steps up behind Maritza, and raises a gun. In a split second, she was gone.
Usted no tiene nada que decir.
Núñez fled, but was caught days later. The tape, however, had already been released. News stations across the country aired it. The clip lived on, recycled in shockumentaries like Traces of Death and in Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine. Maritza's murder became content. At his trial 7 years later, Núñez blamed everyone but himself, the TV crew, and the police. His own lawyer argued the reporter's pushy questions had provoked him, but the jury didn't buy it. They took just over an hour to find him guilty of first-degree murder, and Núñez was eventually sentenced to life. But the real horror of this story isn't just the violence, which is bad enough, it's the context. Maritza's second husband came forward after the murder to set the record straight. He said Núñez was never a loving father, that he never gave his daughter a penny. He said Maritza was so afraid of Núñez, she had once picked out her own funeral dress. This wasn't a man who just snapped. It was the final violent act in a long campaign of control and terror.